this evening with a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. Normally I'd invite Councillor Gardner to sing the national anthem, although I did hear Councillor McIntosh ask who would be singing it, so. Councillor McIntosh, will you please lead us in the singing of our national anthem? Thank you. You did great, Councillor McIntosh. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee peoples, the Mohawks of Akwesasne, the original keepers of this land. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Justin Towndale.
Present.
Councillors Claude McIntosh.
Present.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Present.
Modeste Dupel.
Present.
Sarah Good.
Present.
Cadeline Hébert.
Présente.
Councillors Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Denis Sabourin.
Present.
Todd Bennett.
Present.
And Frank Gunjo.
Présent.
Councillor Sid Gardner sends his regrets, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda? Madam Clerk?
We're going to be removing the first presentation and from the agenda and rescheduling it at a different time.
I'd like to pass on that Lieutenant Colonel Scarf has passed on his regrets. He's feeling ill, so the SNG Highlanders will present at a future meeting in the new year. Any further amendments to the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented, please? Councillor Dupel, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Any disclosures of interest for tonight's meeting? Okay, seeing none, can I have a motion to move in committee of the whole, please? Councillor Sabourin, Councillor Hébert, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes of the meeting of November 14th, please? Councillor McIntosh, Councillor Dupel, any comments on the minutes? All in favor? Carried, thank you. Presentations.
So our first presentation this evening is from the Canadian Forces School of Aerospace Control Operations. And we have here with us Lieutenant Colonel Neil Ryan, Chief Warrant Officer Chuck Ansell, and Honorary Colonel Suzanne Farag. If you would like to join us at the presenters table.
Evening, Your Worship.
Evening, sir. Welcome to council.
So my name is Lieutenant Colonel Neil Ryan, and I'm honored to be here in front of you this evening, in front of your esteemed council, to provide an overview of the Canadian Forces School of Aerospace Control Operations, or we call it CIFSACO for short. I'm also privileged to be joined, as discussed, by Chief Warrant Officer Ansell and Honorary Colonel Suzanne Farag. As I'm sure most of you are aware, Cornwall has had a big military connection dating back to the War of 1812. Where it served as a supply and communications depot, during the important battle at Chrysler's Farm on 11 November 1813, where the Stormont Dundas and Glengarry Highlander Militia fought with the British Permanent Force. That battle was important because it effectively ended the American threat to Montreal, and with it ended the risk that Canada would be split into two parts. Also, during the First World War, a 35-acre basic training center was opened here to reinforce the war effort, ultimately training 15,000 individuals during a grueling 30 to 40-day course. And during the Second World War, many local businesses contributed heavily to the war effort. Canadian Cottons, for example, made Air Force uniforms and Navy uniforms. There were local businesses that made fabric for parachutes, textiles for nursing, material for truck and bomber tires, bunk beds for barracks, and field ambulance beds were all made here in Cornwall. There's also ships that were repaired at the dry docks at the canal. And in 1941, Cornwall purchased more war savings stamps per capita than any other community in the country. The citizens of Cornwall have always been proud of their military members. And after hostilities ceased in the Second World War, 127 houses were constructed for returning veterans. Although I'm always amazed to read about the stories of the local Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Reserve Unit, tonight as the commanding officer of SIFSACO, I'll focus on some of Cornwall's outstanding citizens that proudly wear Air Force and Army uniforms as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces Regular Force. So the Royal Canadian Air Force has been training air traffic controllers at a formal school since the #1 School of Flying Control was established in Trenton, CFB Trenton, in 1946. From 1957 to 79, we had moved and established a school in CFB Borden, just north of Toronto. And then on March 23rd, 1979, the Royal Canadian Air Force moved its air traffic control school to Cornwall, in what was then known as the Transport Canada Training Institute. In '96, our school expanded to incorporate the Air Weapons Control and Countermeasure School, which brought air battle management training, which is most commonly understood as our controllers who surveil and defend North American airspace with our American allies. Most recently, we also expanded again to teach the Tactical Air Control Party air officers. These are controllers who deconflict airspace on behalf of the Canadian Army. And there's a local connection with this course, actually, as it was born out of a series of friendly fire incidents in Afghanistan. One of these early incidents claimed the life of Sergeant Mark Leger, who's from the area. After another friendly fire incident on September 4th, 2006, the Canadian Armed Forces Chief of Defence Staff ordered the Royal Canadian Air Force to take a more active role in the deconfliction of airspace in Afghanistan to reduce the risk to Canadian Armed Forces members. Today, we're excited to be celebrating our 45th year in Cornwall. And over these 45 years, we've seen our members go on to the highest ranks of the Canadian Armed Forces. Former Commandant Paul Hussey became a Major General and commanded the Canadian Defence Academy. Former student Major General Tammy Harris became the Deputy Commander of the Royal Canadian Air Force. She's walked the halls of SIFSACO. And recently retired Major General Pat Carpentier became the Director of Operations for the North American Airspace Defense Command. Another former student, Chief Warrant Officer Denis Gilbert, ascended to the highest enlisted position we have in the Canadian Armed Forces, that of the Canadian Armed Forces Chief Warrant Officer. He also walked our halls. Our staff and students have participated in nearly every conflict and peacekeeping operations that the Canadian Armed Forces have participated in. We have members who have been awarded Distinguished Flying Crosses, Medals of Bravery from Afghanistan, and numerous commendations, meritorious service medals, and orders of military merit. SIFSACO also represents a significant contributor to the local economy. We have $5.5 million worth of contracts with local businesses and individuals, while our 50 permanent staff represent $4.5 million of annual salaries. Additionally, our 200 students a year represent about $3.3 million for the time that they're actually here in the town. These are people that pay property tax, they eat at local restaurants, they enroll their children in sports associations, like myself, use local hoteling and conferencing centers, take in local events with their families throughout the year. But our people are obviously more than an economic statistic. We've had members nominated for commendations for actions taken to remove a local citizen from a burning vehicle. Most recently, one of our members, Master Corporal Monsignor, performed first aid on one of our citizens on injuries sustained after a bicycle accident. This is also the same individual that just keeps going back to Center 105 multiple occasions to help serve meals for our city's vulnerable population. Our unit has a proud history of quiet charitable actions that has a significant impact on Cornwall and the local region. Our members have volunteered countless hours at the Agape Center, Center 105. They've raised significant amount of money for local charities over its history, including over $3,000 year to date. Our fiscal year ends at the end of March, so we're still plenty of time to up that number. We coach and manage local hockey teams and soccer teams, cheer on the Colts, deliver Meals on Wheels, participate in the Holiday Star campaign, buying gifts for local children in need. I would argue that this impact provides more value to the town than any financial impact we could offer. All these members do this because of a call to serve. In the regular force, we serve at the federal level for the federal government. But this mindset that called people to don this uniform is the same mindset that has them out volunteering and raising money in our community. So although most of SIFSACO's members come from different towns across our beautiful country, when we're here, we call Cornwall home. Recently, we were proud to have the entire staff and student body visit the Native North American Traveling College in Akwesasne, where we toured the museum, listened to Indigenous veterans talk about their military experiences. We were taught some of their traditional dances, including their warrior dance, and we all had the opportunity to dance alongside them, which is a powerful moment for everybody involved. To return the favor of our visit to Akwesasne, we were honored to host a group of Akwesasne vets at our school on Remembrance Day this year. Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to be here to talk about some of the great things your amazing temporary citizens, I'll call them, have to offer this town. I feel it's important to focus on these quiet professionals who continue to serve beyond wearing the uniform, since Cornwall has such a long tradition of military service. It's been an honor to be here in front of the esteemed council and yourself this evening.
Thank you, sir. Before I go to questions, I'll just have a motion to receive the presentation. Councillor McIntosh, Councillor Hollingsworth. Questions and comments. Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, welcome. Cornwall does have a long association with the Air Force during the Second World War. Large number of men served in the Air Force, and one I think of is Pilot Officer Bob McDonnell, who served with the Dam Busters. He became a counselor later on when he returned. And another one was Major Harry Cleary, who was shot down, a fighter pilot, shot down over France, captured by the Gestapo, wouldn't give them any information, so they shot him. We have Lieutenant Colonel Tony Johnson, who's from Cornwall at Trenton. He's in charge of air transport, I believe. So we do have an association. I go through the old papers. I'm a bit of a history buff. And it's amazing that when you go from 1940 to 44, the number of Air Force people who were shot down and either captured or killed. And then it sort of, the tide shifted in June 44 when the Army took over the combat mission. So it's really does, we have a great connection with it. We have the RCAFA wing here, and I'm amazed to hear the contribution financially. We're always interested in economics, and we're not Trenton, but it does put a lot of money into the city. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Sabri.
Thank you for your presentation this evening. Thank you for what you do for our country and for our citizens. And I'm always amazed with regards to the recognition that the Air Force has, because it's been a leader internationally for so much of its work. And as a former Air Cadet, I thought at one time I might be in the Air Force someday. But I recall on many conversations with the commercial sector in the aviation, if you want a clear path to an aviation career, start in the Air Force. And I imagine that's part of the problem with the recruitment. You can't keep the numbers up, but I think it's a good path to a very promising career if a person gives it any attention.
Yeah, Your Worship, in response to the councillor's remarks, yeah, absolutely. I think it's hard to compete sometimes with some of the organizations out there, NAV Canada being one of them for air traffic control specifically. The Canadian Armed Forces has struggles to keep up to some of the salaries that would obviously that some of these organizations, Air Canada pilots, very, very similar, do. But I think it goes beyond a salary, and it goes beyond money. So a lot of our people serve for the opportunity to see the world, to defend their country, and you can't really put a monetary value on that. So I think if you walk through our halls and, your worship, you're always welcome, and your council is always welcome. I think if you walk through the halls and talk to our people, I think you'll find people that are here to serve. Some of these organizations can offer higher salaries, but there's one thing that we will always have over those organizations, and that's an opportunity to serve our country.
Further questions or comments? Okay. Just want to say thank you, sir, for your presentation this evening and for providing the information that you did. You may refer to some of your former students and staff as temporary assistants at Cornwall, but once you've lived here, you'll always be a Cornwallite. So I think, just on behalf of the city, I want to thank the many generations of SIFSACO members who've participated in charitable causes in our community and the impacts that you've made in our community. We certainly appreciate it, and they don't go unnoticed. And I will take you up on that tour and make sure that invitation is extended to council and senior administration as well. And our offices can coordinate on a suitable time and place to make that happen. But thank you once again for attending the meeting this evening.
Okay. Thanks, Your Worship.
All in favor of receiving the presentation? It's carried. Thank you.
Our second presentation this evening is about a bylaw to govern the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Cornwall. And here to present is Mr. Rick O'Connor. Now, for people like me in the city clerk world, Rick O'Connor is a superstar. He was the clerk for the City of Ottawa, recently retired, and we were lucky enough to pick his brain and get his assistance in developing or creating this new procedural bylaw. So, Rick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Manon. I appreciate Mr. Mayor, members of council, having me here. I will not have as exciting a story as Air Force and things like that, and I don't expect you folks to stay and listen to all of the procedural stuff that I'm going to go through, but I appreciate having the opportunity to do so. So, Mr. Mayor, as noted, and members of council have noted in the report, that there have been a couple of issues this past year that members of council and council have decided that they should move on with regards to some proposed changes to the Cornwall procedure bylaw. And the first was on February 13th, when there was a direction from council to revise the procedure bylaw with regards to electronic participation, and specifically directed that the bylaw should be revised to allow members who, on occasion, cannot physically attend and will have the option of participating electronically. Your existing bylaw with regards to that procedure limits the external participation or electronic participation as a result of declarations of emergency under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. So it's a step in the right direction. I think a lot of municipalities have done that. Thereafter, on May 8th, Mr. Mayor, there was a motion from Councillors Hollingworth and Sabaram with regards to direction to staff that the administration report on the feasibility of adding community messages and general inquiries section to the agenda and a part of the regular meeting of council. So, Mr. Mayor, this approach that we've put in front of you today will deal with both inquiries and directions, so getting that extra information from members of council and directions to staff, and will include community messages as part of a process that I'm going to mention right now and we'll get into in detail shortly. So, Mr. Mayor, I've been working with the CAO and the city clerk over the last few weeks with regards to these matters, and I'm recommending that on Article 9, your order of the agenda be changed to add something called the Mayor's Summary. And this is something that I'm looking forward to. This would enable you, Mr. Mayor, to provide council and the residents of Cornwall with any update on any new information that you've received, whether it's from other levels of government and ministers, or any relevant matters that you believe important to share with both members of council and the residents. And thereafter, Mr. Mayor, when we add that to Article 9, I would suggest that there be community messages from any members of council who want to add their own additions as a result of that. Mr. Mayor, in addition to that, I also looked at a number of other areas with regards to both the relevant law, the common law, the statute law, and also best practices with regards to procedure bylaws across the province of Ontario that I've been fortunate enough to participate in, including a number of suggestions that come from the Ontario Ombudsman. Now, the Ontario Ombudsman is the meetings investigator for over 200 of the 444 municipalities in Ontario, and I believe, Mr. Mayor, he is, in fact, Cornwall's meetings investigator, so for closed meetings. So I've made a number of recommendations, which I'll get to in a moment, but just as an overview, I'm recommending the removal of language and statutory references that effectively repeat provisions in existing provincial statutes. These would include such things as the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. There's disclosure and quorum requirements that are included in here, and I would recommend they be removed. And also under the Municipal Act, there's entire sections with regards to what happens when there's a vacancy on council. And again, I don't believe there's any need to replicate those in your procedure bylaw. So when we get to Articles 10.6 and 10.7, I've recommended those be removed. Those would be the yellow highlights. Also, Mr. Mayor, I would recommend removal of various policies and procedures. So, for example, the orientation meeting is listed in here, as is the town hall meetings policy under Articles 412 and 413. Those are, in fact, independent policies that stand alone and perhaps even have bylaws that this council has addressed. So, again, there's no meaning to repeat them in a procedure bylaw, which is effectively meant to facilitate your meetings processes, so not about those other matters. Mr. Mayor, I know this may come as a bit of a surprise, but I'm going to recommend a lot of changes to the voting section, being Article 20, because the voting section, Article 20, talks about, and I will get to it in detail, talks about the voluntary abstention process that either mayors, acting mayors, or presiding members, and I'm going to change that term, recommended presiding officers. But I will share with you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, that there are no discretionary abstentions in voting in municipal law. You all have a vote, as we will go through in detail and explain this, including the mayor or the acting mayor, or what I deem to be the presiding officer, so everybody gets to vote. This is borne out in Section 243 of the Municipal Act, Mr. Mayor, which expressly states that, except as otherwise provided, every member of council shall have one vote. Now, Mr. Mayor, when you look at the words except as otherwise provided, I believe that's a leading into the next section under the Municipal Act, which is actually the discretion of council to include in its procedure bylaw a system of proxy votes. Now, Mr. Mayor, before anyone gets excited, obviously the province of Ontario has envisioned that perhaps possibly maybe there will be a council out there that will have proxy voting. So in fact, you could have a member of council voting twice at a council meeting, once on behalf of themselves and once on behalf of a proxy voting. Mr. Mayor, I know of no municipality out of the 444 that have adopted proxy voting, and I don't anticipate that will catch on anytime soon, and I have not recommended it. What I would add, as a result of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and I'm sure every member is very familiar with this, is that there is one statutory requirement for you not to vote, and that is when you have a pecuniary interest, that financial interest under the MCIA, you declare the vote, and then usually you don't vote or you leave the table as a result of that. So, Mr. Mayor, the other couple of amendments that I would recommend making, there's a reference to presiding member in the document all the way through. It's not a term I'm familiar with, and I'm not aware that any other municipality uses it, so I'm sure it comes from some history in Cornwall. I would recommend that that word be changed from presiding member to presiding officer. That is a recognized position in the Municipal Act. It's recognized several times, and it does talk about it would be the person after the mayor or after the acting mayor who would take the place and preside over meetings of council. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I've added a new provision with regards to purposes and principles, which I think this neatly aligns with supporting council's policies regarding transparency and accountability, and also emphasizes the rights of members of council in these meetings to have the information that you need to provide the decision-making process. So, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like, I can go on and proceed in more detail with regards to these matters, including electronic participation under Article 4 and councillors' inquiries and councillors' directions under Article 18.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm going to go and reference the various page numbers from the agenda, just in case it's easier for members to follow. On page 26, this is what I would call the revised preamble to your procedure bylaw, which updates everything with regards to that's happened since the 2020 version. So you're required to have a procedure bylaw for the calling, place, and proceedings of meetings. You must give public notice. That is also included in here. The ability of members to participate electronically will now be new and is in here, and we'll get to momentarily. And then just talking about removing the, repealing the previous bylaw, should council determine it wants to do that. Mr. Mayor, unlike the previous version, there's no reference to MCIA or Robert's Rules of Orders, as I don't believe that those are appropriate when you're dealing with such a sophisticated and, quite frankly, fulsome procedure bylaws you have here. On page 27, Mr. Mayor, the only reference I would have here is not the smaller words where I've added and, or, and established and whatnot, but I would talk about the added definition of the acting mayor. And when I talk about acting mayor for the purposes of the procedure bylaw,
Sorry, Rick, 1 second. Councillor Hollingsworth?
I don't mean to interrupt, but for us paper agenda people, your page numbers aren't referencing, so if you could maybe just give us 2.8, 2.9, so we can kind of follow along that way, with your indulgence, your worship.
Is that
absolutely,
okay?
Mr. Mayor. Apologize for that. So under Article 2.2, there's a reference to a definition for the acting mayor, which points out for the purposes of the procedure bylaw, that is the acting mayor solely to facilitate and preside over the mayor in the meeting in the mayor's absence. I understand that you have a separate bylaw with regards to acting mayor, which is a more fulsome bylaw. I understand Councillor Gardner is currently the acting mayor. I noticed in the agenda, and he would have all of the powers in the absence of the mayor under the statute. So I just wanted to clarify that. Mr. Mayor, I would ask members to look at Article 2.15 and 2.16, which is where we begin to introduce under the definition section the direction to staff and the inquiry. So under 2.15, direction to staff means a request submitted by a member of council in accordance with Article 18, and I'm sure we will get to Article 18, and with the will of either the council or the committee, where the staff has agreed to undertake the additional actions within existing resources and within the scope of an item of business already on the agenda. And I emphasize those last few words, Mr. Mayor and members of council. So when you're thinking about a direction to staff, it is during either a committee meeting or a council meeting, you have an agenda item in front of you, and you want to add some additional direction to staff that staff is going to tell you, this won't cost any additional money. We can do it within the existing resources and within the staff. So it's very much like that, but we'll get into the more detail. The inquiry section under 2.16 responds to council's request to have a mechanism for members of council to ask questions that, quite frankly, are not necessarily on the agenda. So inquiry under 2.16 means a written question filed by a member of council or at a council or committee meeting in accordance with Article 18, where staff has been asked to provide additional information in writing about an existing, and you see the list, bylaw, program, et cetera, including legislation. And an inquiry may be further defined as either, and then we break this down into 2 points. So subsection A talks about a standard inquiry where staff respond using existing resources and within a reasonable period of time. Mr. Mayor, we don't define what a reasonable period of time was. It might be the next 2-week cycle for council to come up. It might be next month if the mayor or the member of council asking says, oh yeah, no, that's fine, next month is good. So reasonable is fairly loose in that regard. However, of greater significance is the subsection B, the definition for significant inquiry, where staff has identified that due to the subject matter or scope of the inquiry, staff cannot respond using the existing resources and information within a reasonable amount of time. And then when we get to Article 18, we'll set out the options that members of council and staff have with regards to that process. Just to mention very briefly, Mr. Mayor, with regards to Article 2.18, the meeting definition, I've included electronic participation just as a point there. Mr. Mayor, I would then ask members to turn to Article 2.24, which is the presiding officer. And again, I tried to explain it's merely in the absence of either another member of council appointed in accordance with the provision of the bylaw, be the acting mayor or the presiding officer. And Mr. Mayor, down at Article 3, 3.1, the purpose and principles articles, Under the purpose, you see we've set out a little bit of a summary there with regards to the fact that this type of thing is with regards to, this type of procedure bylaw, is with regards to a variety of advisory or ad hoc committee meetings. And subsection B, I think, is important. It's intended to align and support the City of Cornwall's policies regarding transparency and accountability. And the principles for members of council, which a number of municipalities have begun to adopt, is each member of council has the following rights: the right to vote on all matters subject to any declaration of a pecuniary interest. Number 2, the right to information to help and make decisions unless otherwise prohibited by law. Number 3, the right to be treated with respect. And number 4, the right to attend and participate in an efficient and effective meeting. And Mr. Mayor, then the last part is the usual jurisdictional question that may arise from time to time, where you at a council meeting, Mr. Mayor, or the chair at a standing committee would determine whether or not the matter is within the jurisdiction in consultation with the city clerk. Mr. Mayor, I'll ask members to turn to Article 4.5, which is defined in 2 different sections as the electronic participation. 4.51 is the general section, which essentially, Mr. Mayor, says that any member of council may participate in an open or closed meeting electronically and be counted for the purposes of quorum. Some of the members who were available during the COVID 2019 and 2020, the original interim legislation that the province allowed us was to say, well, you can have meetings, but electronic meetings, but you can't have them for closed meetings. You have to all be in the room or in some way, shape, and form. And members who were participating electronically wouldn't be counted for quorum. Those restrictions are now gone, so members of council, if you pass this, you would have the same rights and responsibilities as if you were in a meeting, and that's actually continued at the top of the next page with regards to Article sub C. And that would go for, at this point in time, the recommendation is any ad hoc advisory or other special purpose body that council creates. And then, Mr. Mayor, there's some specific references under Article 4.52 for electronic participation. These are based on some observations and recommendations made by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, the Association of Municipal Senior Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario, as well as the Ontario Ombudsman, who from time to time comments on these sorts of matters with regards to closed meetings investigations. So the first part, electronic participation may be conducted by way of telephone, video conferencing software, or any other electronic means. And Mr. Mayor, I would recommend leaving that sort of as vague as it is, because I know our colleagues in IT from time to time will move from Zoom and on to Teams and then farther on out. So this would allow council to be covered for those contingencies should they occur. Also talks about the fact that the clerk will ensure that the meeting may proceed in the most transparent, efficient, and effective manner under all of the circumstances. And we would be looking, as you can see under the next section, all meetings shall be communicated, electronic meetings, to members of council and to public in advance of the meeting so that they know how to participate. Subsection 6, Mr. Mayor, I'm recommending that for those members who are participating electronically, that if they do have a pecuniary interest in the matter, they actually fully disclose and then disconnect from the meeting. And I know the practice of a lot of municipalities is if you declare at a public meeting, you could go and sit in the audience, and members like to remove themselves. I think that's a little more difficult when you're sitting on a screen and you're constantly being seen. You could, I assume, back away from the screen, but I think that gets to be a bit of a bizarre scenario, so that is my recommendation, Mr. Mayor. And obviously, if you're participating electronically and you are no longer able to participate for some reason or other, that, Mr. Mayor, the member advise you and the city clerk so the appropriate note can be made that you are no longer participating in the meeting. Moving on, Mr. Mayor, to Article 4.10.1 with regards to the resolution to move in closed session. And this is an area, Mr. Mayor, where the Ontario Ombudsman has made numerous inroads with regards to recommendations for best practices. So I put in a new resolution for your consideration, which is based on the Ontario Ombudsman's recommendations. So you would have the first part is the fact of the holding of the closed meeting. And second, you have to state the general nature of the matter, which you're already required to do by statute, but also by reference of the specific issue to be considered at the closed meeting. Now, Mr. Mayor, I've referenced that the Ontario Ombudsman routinely investigates matters of closed meetings with regards to the 200 or so municipalities in Ontario. And I can tell you that the most recent report that he's done on the closed meetings was last Tuesday. And it involved the City of Hamilton, and it was a committee in the City of Hamilton. And I'm just reading the summary, Mr. Mayor. The Ombudsman concluded that the committee did not contravene the open meetings requirements under the Municipal Act, as the in-camera discussion was permissible under the Act. However, he points out that to improve the accountability and transparency of its meetings, the Ombudsman made best practice suggestions, there were a number of them, relating to the committee's closed meeting procedures. And one of the things that the Ontario Ombudsman has repeated in a number of cases is the fact that there is a 2007 Ontario Court of Appeal case involving the City of Kingston, which I think is just up the road, with regards to how it should be interpreted when we are trying to provide as much information to members of the public before councils go into closed session. So he said in this particular report last Tuesday, furthermore, it is a statutory requirement under Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 that before holding a closed meeting, council must state by resolution the fact of the holding of the closed meeting and the general nature of the matter to be considered at the closed meeting. He points out in Farber versus Kingston, the 2006 case, the Ontario Court of Appeal noted that a resolution to go into a closed meeting, and I quote, should provide a general description of the issue to be discussed in a way that maximizes the information available to the public while not undermining the reason for proceeding in closed session. So, Mr. Mayor, it's obviously going to be a balancing act with regards to whatever the issue is that council wants to deal with in closed session. But the Ontario Ombudsman is encouraging municipalities in setting out best practices that we should be trying to provide additional information than what is required under the statute. Mr. Mayor, under just by reference under section 4.10.10, there's a reference to a notice of motion for in-camera meetings. This council has a very fulsome notice of motion section under Article 16 for all of your meetings, so I recommend that that could be removed. And then, Mr. Mayor, on Articles 4.11, the electronic participation, 4.12, the orientation meeting, and 4.13, the town hall meetings, I would recommend those are all no longer required because you're making inroads with regards to electronic participation, and the other two policies do not need to be addressed. Mr. Mayor, I would ask members to move to Article 7, the conduct during council meetings, and in particular, Articles 7.6, which is regards to dress codes, Article 7.7, with regards to dress codes, Article 7.8 with regards to apparel, and 7.9 with regards to code of ethics. Mr. Mayor, I understand in talking with the CAO and the city clerk that a lot of these provisions were put in the past with regards to a single individual, as I understand it, and that individual is no longer associated or relevant. Thank you very much. Relevant. So as I see everyone dressed very businesslike today, I would suggest that those sections on apparel are no longer required for this particular council and its procedure bylaw. Mr. Mayor, with regards to 7.9, the Code of Ethics and Confidentiality, there are a number of sections here you can see in yellow that I would recommend removing because the thrust of them would prohibit a member of council from participating in a closed meeting in some of the instances and sets up barriers for that participation. I believe that these matters are now overcome by your code of conduct, which is for members of council and your local boards. And those matters are within the jurisdiction of the Integrity Commissioner under the Municipal Act 2001. So I can share with you, this is public knowledge, there's no secret, the City of Ottawa in the last term of council went through a number of matters with a particular member of council who had a number of egregious breaches of our code of conduct. The Integrity Commissioner recommended a series of 90-day suspensions with pay, which is the maximum penalty. I think at the end of the day it was all told 450 days of no pay. However, there was no way to prevent that member from coming to council meetings or coming to electronic participation, so whether it's in camera or not. So a number of the sections here under 7.9, the Code of Ethics, are actually been overtaken by the Code of Conduct regime and the Integrity Commissioner regime, and I'm recommending that those be removed, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'll ask members to turn to Article 9, which is the order of business or for the agenda. And I would say, Mr. Mayor, that this is a work in progress. And if council so allows myself to continue working with the CAO and with the clerk staff, this would be something we would be reviewing with regards to midterm governance. So some of the underlining words here are things that I would recommend you include. A respelling of in camera is the first one, but the Indigenous acknowledgement, as you stated at the beginning of the meeting, is very important, and a lot of municipalities are including it in the order of business or the agenda. I would recommend removing the sort of ambiguous opening under subsection E, and that, Mr. Mayor, is where I would suggest the mayor's update go in its place, and then followed by the members' community events. And then as you scroll on down, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest removing Committee of the Whole, and I'm going to take a moment and explain why I would recommend eliminating Committee of the Whole, because you don't have a Committee of the Whole structure on the basis of my review of your procedure bylaw. What you have is a standing committee structure, so you strike standing committees, and standing committees report up to council. So there is no need for a Committee of the Whole. And I know, Mr. Mayor, there was a motion to go into Committee of the Whole at the beginning of this meeting, and I noticed there is no other part in the procedure bylaw where you would rise and report from the Committee of the Whole to resume back at this meeting to be in council and then pass all your bylaws, because Section 5 of the Municipal Act says only council can pass bylaws. So you would have to be sitting as council, not a Committee of the Whole. So I know that might be a significant change, but it's something that I think council should seriously consider. So that is why I would delete it and retain the standing committee process that you have. Move delegations up to the presentations, Mr. Mayor, and then down at the bottom we've got spots for the inquiries, and then we've moved resolutions closer to the bottom of the agenda under subsection Y. Mr. Mayor, I'll just go on. If members could turn to Article 16, Resolutions and Notices of Motion. In particular, Mr. Mayor, I understand under 16.5, notice introduced and notice requirements. I understand 16.5.1, absolutely. The wording under Section 16.5 sub 2 is a little bit confusing for those of us who are procedural wonks. A member of staff may introduce a notice of motion. So when I read that, that sounds like a member of staff is introducing a notice of motion, and that is not, of course, possible under the Municipal Act. Only you members can introduce notice of motion. I understand in talking with the clerk, it's the preparation of motions in advance. So we might be able to work some more appropriate language than what is currently there, I think, just for clarification, Mr. Mayor. And then, Mr. Mayor, if you turn to Article 18, which is the article now entitled Inquiries, Directions, and Answers, hopefully, from staff. I've subdivided this section into two sections, and with possibly the direction of council, we could subdivide it into three. Mr. Mayor, I've got under 18.1 inquiries, and I'll discuss those momentarily. Under 18.7, I've got directions, and then there's a couple of clauses there. And I forgot, Mr. Mayor, quite frankly, to put in under 18.9 the subheading of process, because you'll notice from 18.9 on, there's a merging of the processes with regards to directions and inquiries, so I would have preferred that I had a process subsection there. So if council directed, I would certainly add that in the next iteration. So, Mr. Mayor, looking at Article 18.1, This says any inquiry made at a council or standing committee meeting shall be submitted in writing. And the wording I had put in originally, Mr. Mayor, was and should be submitted at least 24 hours in advance. In talking with the city clerk earlier today, she said because the agenda comes out a week in advance and because Monday is your council meeting, the way I've written it, Mr. Mayor, would require members to be submitting their inquiries on Sunday, which clearly doesn't make sense. So she has recommended that instead it say one business day in advance, which would be the Friday. So I think that's a better way to do that sort of thing. So you would hand your inquiry in writing, goes to the CAO, if appropriate, the department head, and then the city clerk and the treasurer, if appropriate. Mr. Mayor, Article 18.2 talks about the fact that any one of those persons would then provide a response in writing to the inquiry, and it would be distributed to the mayor and all members of council and to the committee if it arose as a result of a committee, and would be put on the agenda as a result of Article 18.5 a little later on. Looking at 18.3, Mr. Mayor, though, this is where we come back to talk about Article 2.16 sub B, the significant inquiry. So if staff have identified what is being offered from a member of council as an inquiry, as a significant inquiry, staff would communicate that again to the committee and council, and it would then be up to the member to say, you know what, I really think this is important, and I'm going to move this as a motion at committee or council, and you would get a seconder, and it would proceed accordingly. That is because council or the committee would then make the determination as to whether or not it was a workload issue or a priority issue. If staff say they cannot do it, you'll either provide them with the resources or you will tell them to move something else down on their priorities. You're in charge, Mr. Mayor, members of council, so it puts it back with council in the driver's seat in that regard. Article 18.4 merely is a mechanism to produce these quarterly. This could be through simple email or a memo to mayor and members of council, where the clerk would provide a quarterly status update of where those outstanding inquiries are, with the responsible department also listed. And I can share from past practice, you do not want to be on that list if you are the head of the responsible department for more than one quarter or two. Article 18.5, Mr. Mayor, talks about listing it on the standing committee, and I've already spoken to that. And then 18.6 sets out, again, it's within the purview of a member of council if they've launched their inquiry and say it was to be appearing in the third quarter of this year, but then they decide, nope, I've got all the information I need. So that member would merely write to the city clerk and request that it be withdrawn, and then it would be withdrawn and taken off the list. 18.7, Mr. Mayor, is with regards to the proposal for directions. And again, in Article 2.15, an item of business that is already on an agenda is where you get a direction because it's a discussion that is ongoing, presumably at a council or committee meeting. All directions shall be in writing under subsection 7 and under 18.8. They will be included in the draft minutes. Both of these recommendations, Mr. Mayor, are recommendations from the Ontario Ombudsman that he says all matters that are either in open session or in closed session must be recorded, and he's been very clear, including directions. His reasoning is the fact that both members of staff and council should have appreciation of what is actually being asked, and that the members of public, if it's in an open session, will be able to see it later on. Mr. Mayor, going down to the third portion of this, as I said, I would call the new process section under 18.9. This is where there's a direction to staff or an inquiry, and if it's about a new policy or program or changes to existing policies or programs that are approved by council, or where staff has identified it as a significant inquiry, so to speak, and it cannot be done within existing resources or without impacting work plans or priorities, and they would so state, and then again, a motion could be moved for council to make that determination in the broader scheme of things, taking it out of staff's hands. 18.10, Mr. Mayor, if anyone at any time says with regards to a direction or an inquiry, you know what, I would like to have a vote on that, Mr. Mayor, then that automatically becomes a motion. You would need a mover and a seconder, and the normal course again for voting would take place at council. Under 18.11, Mr. Mayor, this looks ahead at the new term of council, so imagine 3 years in advance. the city clerk would review all of the outstanding motions and be beginning to make determinations with regards to whether or not they've been completed, whether it was through a response or through some sort of alternative action by staff, or whether it's no longer in keeping with the stated strategic initiatives of council. And finally, Mr. Mayor, under 18.4, this would be at the end of a term of council where the city clerk again would deem to be closed all of the outstanding matters with regards to directions or inquiries, and that list would then close off the day. So, Mr. Mayor, that's sort of the overview with regards to those issues. Just looking. I've already spoken to Article 20 and the removal of the discretionary voting, Mr. Mayor, so I would actually ask members to go right to Article 32 near the end of the bylaw, which is the section about the resignation and vacancy of members, and actually is under the Municipal Act 2001, and it's actually quoted throughout there, and would recommend all of Article 32 be removed. So, Mr. Mayor, those are my comments, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Appreciate you taking us step by step through this. I'll entertain questions from council. I just want to remind council that we will not be approving or voting on this evening. The plan is for this to come back on our December 11th agenda, and we'll have our debate on the item then. But comments and queries are still welcome tonight, but I'd still be looking for a motion to receive the presentation. Councillor Dupel, Councillor Sabourin, questions and comments from council. Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this is not a question about any particular point. It's just as to whether or not Mr. O'Connor will be with us when we, in the first quarter, when we actually discuss removing or changing or adapting this in some way. I think his guidance has been exceptional. And
Mr. Seo.
Pending council's comfort on the work for the procedural bylaw, we certainly would like to continue working with Mr. O'Connor in the capacity as a consultant for us. There's a number of bylaws, that they be procurement, protocol, midterm governance. There's a number of elements that we've begun conversations with Mr. O'Connor and would like to proceed in the new year. And I don't know if our clerk wanted to add.
So the procedure bylaw is really the step one in modernizing our council meetings, and there's a lot of work to be done, and that is part of the report that was attached to the procedure bylaw. It is the midterm governance and looking at all of the different policies so that we can realign to fit into the procedure bylaw. And once those changes have been implemented, that Article 9 will most likely change as we move along the process.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to have a number of questions. Hopefully they won't sound too dumb. Thanks for your time. And I am probably guilty of being a bit of a procedure kind of guy as well. I like having the rules nice and clean. That way I know where I stand. So forgive me if I ask a few questions. So first of all, for 2.15, do I read that correctly then? That if, so 2.15, submitted request, undertake, so does that mean that if we're debating an issue and I require maybe some further information or action, that technically speaking, I don't have to like make a motion and go through debate, that I can simply request Manager B, can you provide us information at the next meeting about snow plowing, and that I don't have to have a seconder and debate and then go back to the original motion and debate again? Can I just kind of move forward and ask for that information under this provision?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
That's awesome. Second of all, so with regards to 4.5.2, electronic participation, so the original motion, if I can remember correctly, said occasional absentee. So, well, you know, I'll be on electronically when I can't get there because my car broke down. If I was to, under this, the way it's written here, does that mean that I could conceivably be online for an indefinite period of time? That I could literally never physically be obliged to come to a council meeting as long as I log in through Teams every meeting and spend the next 4 years in my pajamas participating? Is that kind of what I'm reading here?
Mr. Mayor, under dire circumstances, that is a possible scenario. However, I want to go back to the actual, and the member was right to comment on it. It was to allow members who, on occasion, cannot physically attend and will have the option of participating electronically. Now, to clarify something or characterize it as being cannot physically attend would actually constitute a potential breach under any number of accommodation issues under the AODA, the Ontario accessibility legislation, and could in fact be, and again, I'm being somewhat provocative, a breach under the Human Rights Code, because I'm not required to tell
Right.
you that I have a disability or I can't make it in because of a required illness. So this is the type of clause under 452 that many municipalities have turned to.
Okay. 9.1.1, delivery of agenda. So if I read that correctly, our paper days are over if we approve this? For us old paper makers, 17 years who still cling to paper, if we approve this, that's it? The dinosaurs are put out to pasture and that kind of thing?
Mr. Mayor, I subject to be corrected, stand to be corrected by the clerk or the CAO. But yes, it is a wave that most municipalities have gone to. You can obviously still print out the document if you're so inclined. And I'll be candid, at the City of Ottawa, I was printing them out right up until I was done, so I can certainly appreciate the paper aspect. As you can see, I like paper. So.
Well, I'm a paper guy, so either way, we'll haggle that at the moment of truth. If you take a look at 13.5, questions to delegation. So just so I'm clear on it, I know it. So it says members are permitted to ask questions of delegates, but shall not make statements to or enter into debate with such persons. Historically, especially as we get close to election time, it has been my experience that certain councillors like to make a statement when somebody makes a presentation for whatever reason, I don't know. But if we adopt this under 13.5, if somebody decides to make a statement like, well, this is a great idea and I'm in full support, are they technically out of order? Because if I read it correctly, you're allowed to ask, I can ask you a question right now, but I can't say, yes, this is the best report ever and we should endorse it and that kind of thing. Am I reading that correctly?
I believe, Mr. Mayor, the member is reading it correctly. I did not make any recommendations for changes, so this section is in your current bylaw. So it is what you are currently using. So I would suggest whatever the past practice is, that would continue because there's no recommendation to change the language.
Okay, I've always thought that, but just as a reference, Your Worship, and to you, I appreciate 20.3 with regarding to abstentions. It's always been, I've haggled with some of my colleagues over the years that you can't abstain as a councillor. Municipal Act specifically says it doesn't exist. If you're abstaining, that means you're voting against. Is that correct? I think I've got that right.
I think that's a fair assessment of it, Mr. Mayor. The clerk in me would quibble that since there is no abstention, it doesn't automatically default as being a non-vote. However, the member is correct. If you are sitting there and you're asked to vote on something and you don't vote, and I've had 2 occasions in the past where I've had a member of council not vote, that is deemed to be a negative vote, so the member's correct.
Well, I'm glad we got that wording out of there. It's driven me crazy for a long time. That's pretty much it, Your Worship, I think. Thank you again for answering my questions. I think I'm pretty clear on what we're doing moving forward. And yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to pick up on that last question that Councillor Hollingsworth raised, in one of these numbers, it's in 20.3, you have the phrase, "and who has not indicated that they abstain or decline to vote." So if that's removed, then a person doesn't even have to declare that they're abstaining. They're counted as a negative if they make no statement. And this is something we've actually had the Integrity Commissioner rule on here in the last term of council, so.
Oh,
And it,
I know you're Integrity Commissioner.
okay, really bothers me because it's just a weasel way of voting no without taking credit for voting no.
Mr. Mayor, in response, I think by taking out the abstention, I think I'm being consistent with the earlier comments. But I also like the way 20.3 reads now without it, which is failure to vote by a member who is not disqualified, so you didn't declare a pecuniary interest under the municipal conflict of interest, shall be deemed to be a negative vote. So again, if you're sitting there, you don't vote, you are not disqualified from voting, it is a negative vote.
Councillor Sabri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. With regards to section 18 on inquiries, I found it fascinating. I don't know why, but I'm that type of person. The timeframes is one thing. Deadlines, to me, should basically be a key element of inquiries as to when it should be submitted and within, the time necessary to put an inquiry response together. But 18.2, with regards to it, at the end of the term of council, all inquiries basically become dead, for lack of a better word, and that stuff. And if there's no real dates for targets as to response in that, you can continuously put something back before giving your response to the inquiry, and it dies with the term of council. But at the next term of council, all the items that have basically died, a list is provided. Is there a mechanism, or should you incorporate a mechanism to bring them back? Because some people that made those inquiries in the previous council could very well be back and be looking for that same information.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I was actually intentionally silent on that, but appreciating that members do get reelected, and they could very well, under the usual circumstances as laid out in the procedure bylaw, launch that inquiry once again. So it's akin to dying on the order paper at the provincial or federal level. However, the member is correct that if reelected, it could be brought back.
If I may, on the rules with regards to the order paper, if the original mover and seconder bring it back, it comes back, even though the term of parliament has lapsed or whatever, and that's so. I mean, I don't see why such a mechanism can't be there within the Municipal Act or within our guidelines here, okay? Also, I have a question with regards to the declaration of pecuniary interest. Leave the meeting. Define leave the meeting, please.
For the purposes of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, members are required to declare the interest. And if you are in a regular meeting and it's an open session, you just don't participate. What has been the practice of many municipalities is that members will leave their seat to try to get physical distance from the decision-making body. There was at least one case where a municipal councillor was brought up under the application in front of a court for making gestures and rolling her eyes and make, and so someone actually brought that member to court. So most municipalities said, we don't even need to put it in the rules, but if you just go and get a coffee or chat with staff or do something else, don't be in the physical area. So with regards to the closed session, if it's a closed session, you have a conflict of interest in the declaration, you have to leave the meeting. That's very clear in the legislation. So I'm trying to emulate that with the recommendation of if you have a declaration and you're online somewhere, and it's very hard for the clerk to try to manage what is going on. And as I said, if you're on the screen, but maybe you just move away from the visual, but then you make noises or go, oh my goodness. So I don't want councillors to end up down the path because we live in a fairly litigious society, and there will be people who will take advantage of that. So that's the essence of the recommendation.
I have Councillor Goods and Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. This is very valuable information, especially as a first-time counselor. I have a number of questions. Some of them are little questions and some of them are a bit bigger. So article number 4.2, regular schedule designated time, it says commencing at 5 p.m. on Mondays, the second and fourth Monday of the month. Typically, we start at 7 p.m. I just want to confirm that that is not a change to, like, is that an intended change?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and this is going to be based on my understanding.
Yeah.
But I understand that, for example, tonight in the agenda, you had a meeting at 5 o'clock or at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock. So the requirements under the Municipal Act is that you start the meeting, you publish it, you give notice of it, you start it in open session, then you move the motion, and I've included the motion for going in closed session, and then you would ask the public to leave, and if it's online, you would shut off the online version, and you would ask any staff who are not necessary to stay, they would also be asked to leave in the normal sense. I did not get the sense that that is the process that you may be using at this point, and I think that you would be vulnerable to a closed meetings investigation if the Ombudsman were to come down here from Toronto and investigate that process. So I'm trying to assist in that regard.
Okay, so would best practice be that each meeting would, like an in-camera meeting would start at 5 p.m. and would be scheduled for, because typically in practice, depending on the items that we have, we would start at 6. If we think it'll only take an hour, we might start at 5 if it's some larger items that we have more questions about. So your recommendation would be best practice would start at 5 p.m. all the time?
I think it would be, and again, I'm in the council's hand as to what the timeline being asked is, but my concern is that you need to state the notice requirement is in the legislation. You need to state what time you're going to start. You start at that time. You start in open, and then you move the motion to go into closed session. Okay. So it's not where you've got it on your agenda where you just sort of automatically go into closed session. You actually open in open session, close the meeting, ask people to leave, and then you rise and report from that closed session afterwards. And again, these are things that I'm having discussions with the clerk and the CAO about some of the finer assistance that I can provide.
Wonderful. And of course, some of it is just logistical in the way that, how are the meetings actually playing out. On that note, and I don't have the article number here, but with giving 24 hours notice, but it was mentioned that it would actually be one business day, for most, or some of us here who are working Monday to Friday during the week, it really does not give a lot of time to actually submit those inquiries ahead of receiving an agenda. So I wonder if that's something that can be considered as this is being looked at, what the implications are. It's a pretty big difference in terms of the time requirement in order to submit an inquiry.
Mr. Mayor, I have no problem revisiting that issue.
Madam Clerk?
I just wanted to point out two things. So dealing with this question here, you would actually have more time. So our agenda is now being delivered on the Monday before the council meeting. Mm-hmm. You would have all week, Monday to Friday, to read it and submit that inquiry. So the Friday before the Monday's meeting.
Just so that I understand correctly, so we could, because our council meetings are set for 5 p.m., we could send it at 4:30 on a Friday, end of work day. It probably isn't going to get addressed until Monday anyways. I just want to ensure that the people who are working Monday to Friday aren't stuck with that tiny window to try and submit it. And that, is it adding, with all respect, we want to make sure that there's a sufficient amount of time for staff to do the research to actually be able to answer the inquiry. Is there a difference between submitting it at 4:30 on a Friday or submitting it at 4:30 on a Sunday to the staff who are receiving said inquiry?
So an inquiry that is submitted at a council will not be answered at that council. It'll be answered at a later council, and I believe, looking for, as Rick, as a former clerk in Ottawa, I think the procedure was very similar, but the practice was very different. We were recommending members of council to submit inquiries ahead of time, but as it is an agenda item, it can be presented on the floor, and there's sometimes reasons to do so. So I don't know, Mr. O'Connor, if you had a perspective on that.
All right, just to add, Mr. Mayor, that again, these are, when we're talking about inquiries, we're not talking about an agenda item. We're talking about, oh, I'd like more information on this program
Yeah.
that we're running. So you could, as the clerk has indicated, you can launch that any time. It doesn't have to be related to the agenda. It will be put on an agenda, and staff will then respond in due course. And again, as the CAO said, it won't be that meeting necessarily, but you'll be able to launch it whenever, and that's to get you that information.
Perfect. I appreciate that clarification. My next question is around Article 4.5.2C. So that's the electronic participation. And as you were reading through it, and it says basically that anyone who has a pecuniary interest shall fully disconnect and leave the electronic meeting, not participate in any way. Again, from a purely logistical standpoint, and an understanding that once you disconnect from a meeting, that reconnecting may pose some technical issues, may impact quorum, et cetera. In this review, would it be possible to look at having a camera turned off and a microphone muted so that there would not be distractions, but so that that connection would remain?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think the procedures would be written out for you after this bylaw is approved, and it would basically be, we would put you back in the waiting room. And once that issue is done, we would bring you back on so you don't disconnect.
Beautiful. Okay, I was just imagining the technical nightmare.
Yes.
People texting you.
We
"No,
learn
no,
from
I'm
our
not."
mistakes, yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, a few more questions. 7.4 about criticism for decisions that have previously been approved by council. Does this apply to previous terms of council? If there was a decision made in a term, let's say a term that you were not an elected official during, are you still prohibited from criticizing?
This is a section, again, I didn't weigh in on. I don't believe so. I don't believe that would be the intent of it. Again, at a number of municipalities, with a new council is a new term, and quite frankly, council, if a previous council did something, it might be a strategic initiative of a new council to stop that, whatever it was, and to go in a different direction, because that is what you got elected for at the end of the day. So I don't believe that would be any sort of prohibition.
Perfect. I have 13.5 questions, and I don't know what my question was. So you actually, sorry, Councillor Hollingsworth already did ask about this and in regards to not being able to make a statement. So yeah. Is that something that can be considered? I don't know, is that commonplace? Is that best practice in other municipalities that you've reviewed these bylaws for?
It is, Mr. Mayor. Most councils do not want to get into a jousting match with members of the public. And quite frankly, the City of Ottawa had some issues with that in the past. And I'll speak very candidly, since we're at an open meeting. If you have a difficult, challenging delegation, what I've seen many councils in the past do is just say received. They don't engage, they don't talk to the individual, they don't give them any more airtime than they need, and it's a recognition of members of council to say, well, we heard you, but we don't need to engage with you because of your particular stance. So that is something that council does on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. And my last question was, I thought I understood you say something about receiving direction to include a process section. Did I understand that properly?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, under Article 18.9, I forgot to put in a subheading, which was process. So I would dearly accept a direction from this council to add process in the next iteration.
Great. I would love to make a motion to include process in the next iteration of the procedural bylaws.
I would suggest that you don't even have to make a motion
Oh,
if you
okay.
are making a direction, and staff agree that they would like that direction and can do it without any
Cool.
additional costs or personnel, we'd be pleased to add that. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you, that is all.
Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, a couple of scenarios you might want to file under S for silly, but they actually happened. Not with this council. When it comes to councillors declaring a conflict, I was told about a small rural municipality where a councillor declared a conflict, went and sat in a room. As the debate went on, another councillor went over and asked him a question and came back to the table. That's a no-no?
The requirements under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act require members who've made a declaration not to influence the vote before, during, or after. So I would suggest by going and speak to him, that member would have breached his requirements under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act.
Okay, so many times there's no public scrutiny with these small municipalities. They don't even have to close the doors. Nobody's around, nobody covers them. The whole, you know the drill. The other one, when it comes to abstaining, and this is another one I heard happened with another municipality. This person didn't want to vote on it, didn't want to vote either way. So he got up and left the meeting just before the vote was taken, claiming that he had a phone call. Left the meeting, stayed out long enough to miss the vote, and then came back.
Mr. Mayor, I'll preface my remarks by saying that 99.9% of council meetings that I've sat through and committee meetings, members understand their obligation to vote. They do vote, and there's never been an issue. Having said that, Mr. Mayor, back in the days of the region of Ottawa-Carleton, there was a day when we were dealing with something called a smoking ban. And this was very contentious, and the region was the first in the province that was going down this path. And at the time of a particular crucial vote, because the chair of the committee called the vote, 6 members of council got up and ran out of the room claiming they had to go to the washroom at that point in time. So it may not only happen at small municipalities.
Would that affect quorum?
It did not, because in those days we had 32 members.
Oh, okay. But it could?
It could, yes.
6 people.
Yeah, okay.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Gunjo.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. In fact, I have some questions, but my colleague already asked of some of them. But still, I would like to make sure that everything looks crystal clear. I am assuming that we are not being asked to approve this new proceeding bylaw this evening, so this is clear. Thank you. Speaking about time, please, can we, this is to Madam Clerk, can you clarify this point? Because I see that we should start at 5 p.m., but sometime we start at 6. What is the law, speaking of that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the idea is to flip the meetings around, to start with the open meeting, and the closed meeting would come after that, in order to get our consultants in and out as quickly as possible, in order to leave staff, let staff start their evening a little bit earlier. That was the idea behind that, is to flip them around. So we would always start at 5. The closed meeting would be dependent on how the open meeting, how long the open meeting would last.
But I have a concern here because I know, and it's speaking about me, being here at 5, it's something impossible because we have other, we are working. I'm not alone. We have other colleagues that are engaged in other position. So being here at 5 p.m., it looks like not realistic to me. Speaking about the council, and it's going to impact, I'm going to count roughly 30% of the council. So it's something that should be discussed or check if it is possible to manage that.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, it is at the will of council.
Yeah, I would just like to add, Councillor Gunjo, I share your concerns. It's something that previous councils have debated, the start time. It's something that we'll be able to debate next council meeting when we discuss the bylaw in earnest. Council, this is a recommendation, and it's not set in stone at this time, so council can make decisions based on what works best and discuss concerns then.
There are recommendations in the report. I believe there are important ones relating to compliance as presented by Mr. O'Connor, but there are others that are from a governance perspective of council that it'd be is food provided, time start, elements like that that are embedded in the report that we're seeking your guidance on, and obviously would reflect those changes in the final report, or the mayor, as described, would be receiving direction or motions at the next council. So there is time for members of council to discuss it and come to an agreement on the best approach.
Thank you very much. At the same time, I wanted to speak about how the agenda are presented, but we're going to discuss that on the time. Okay, but a question for you. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very interesting and informative. Where Cornwall is, based on your experience, where can you locate Cornwall on speaking about this document? Are we at the end of the list, or in the middle, or what is your feeling?
Mr. Mayor, I'll say you're probably in the middle of the list. I've been to some other municipalities where we're literally starting from scratch. So I think there was a lot of good in this bylaw. As you've seen, I haven't made certain changes, but I believe in continuous improvement in everything we do. So that's why part of the recommendation is that council continue to look at its governance documents, like this document, like its delegation of authority, like its delegation of powers, all of those things. So somewhere in the middle, Mr. Mayor.
To you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. We're speaking about democracy here. So this document is going to help administration to be efficient, to respond to our residents, right? In this case, I would like to speak quickly about the two official languages. What are your recommendations about this document and the two official languages?
I can give you the strictly legal answer, Mr. Mayor, which is you can have bylaws in English and you can have bylaws in English and French. I'm not aware of what bilingualism policy you may have. As you're aware, the City of Ottawa has something called the City of Ottawa Act 1999. It is required by the province of Ontario to have a bilingualism policy, and we do have a policy that's enshrined in a bylaw. So I'm not certain how much further you would want me to take that answer.
Oh, it's a recommendation. So, to my point of view, I think we should have a bilingual one. So I don't know if you share this point of having a bilingual.
Councillor, maybe I can answer. There is a direction from the mayor that dates back from September 25th that relates to a scan of services that are available and offered by the municipality to residents that are francophones. We, through the clerk's office, we are currently conducting that review across the organization. We are certainly sensitive to the governance aspects and the ability for the francophone community to be engaged through that, and I believe the clerk is well positioned to propose some new approaches, as particularly really relating to our agendas, relating to report recommendations, relating to minutes. We have the tools now to easily translate those documents. I think the question is beyond that, which is where does that extend to within the organization? And I'm not sure we'll have a fulsome answer this evening. And Madam Clerk, I'll turn it over to you if there's something that I would like to you'd like to.
We are canvassing the different departments to see what kind of services are being delivered in French. I think we have more than we thought, is to be determined. But again, we are at the will of council, and if that was a direction of council to produce the agenda in French and English, then we would find a way to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I think we're going to debate later about this point. Thank you very much, Mrs. Clark.
Thank you. Councillor Dupel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just wanted to speak about the reversing the order of the meetings. So if we were to start with an open meeting at 5, would that defer decisions that might be made in camera to the
So you actually have to open up the meeting once again. And I know we've worked on some language for carrying the confidential reports or moving them forward in some fashion. So you still have to rise and report from the closed session. And then you have to pass all your bylaws back as council again. So that would be the process. You start the meeting at 5, do all of your open stuff, go into closed session, I don't know, just guessing, 7 o'clock, 7:30, rise and report, and then finish the meeting in open session and pass your bylaws.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any further questions or comments? Okay, great. Mr. O'Connor, thank you very much for the amount of work you put into this. I want to thank Madam Clerk and Mr. Seo as well for their input and work on this so far. We're not done yet. Obviously, we need to debate and then pass this, but I think we have a good base to move forward. Look forward to continuing the discussion and having this in place, well, ideally for the start of 2024. That said, I'm going to call the vote on receiving the presentation. All in favor? All opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to consent reports, Mr. Mayor. Consulting services for the Cornwall Water Purification Plant, UV system replacement, with the recommendation that this RFP be awarded to RV Anderson Associates Limited from Toronto at a total net cost of $264,400.97. Supply and installation of in-ground 2-post bus hoist, with a recommendation that this tender be awarded to Garage Supply Contracting Incorporated at a total net cost of $216,219.05. Supply and replacement and exterior doors of Glenview Heights, with a recommendation that tender 23T54 be awarded to John Gordon Construction Incorporated from Cornwall at a total net cost of $212,541.01. Drinking raw water coagulant, with a recommendation that council approve the non-competitive procurement for the supply and delivery of potable water coagulant to the water purification plant from Chimera Water Solutions Canada Incorporated from Faden, Quebec, at a total net cost of $219,862.66 for 2024, and that the pricing for 2025 to be negotiated. Supply and installation of play structure, Bellwood Ridge Park, Grant Park, and Chevalier Park, with the recommendation that RFP 23P22 be awarded to New World Park Solutions Incorporated from Brantford at a total net cost of $404,853.18. 2023 Annual Report for Municipal Grants Program, with a recommendation that council receive this report for the 2023 Annual Report for the Municipal Grants Program. Digital transformation, that council approve the non-competitive procurement for the phased implementation of a Microsoft Dynamics and Power Platform digital transformation to RSM from Toronto for a total bid price of $2 million. $2 million. Is that correct? $2 million. Elevator upgrades at Justice Building and Cornwall Civic Complex, with a recommendation that council approve the non-competitive procurement for the elevator upgrades at the Justice Building and Cornwall Civic Complex to TK Elevator at a total net cost of $653,871.71.
Thank you. Motion, Counselor Hollingsworth. Seconder, Counselor Bennett. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
And we are looking for a motion to receive the unfinished business listing, Mr. Mayor.
Counselor Dupel, Counselor Hebert. Any discussion? Counselor McDonald, then Counselor Good.
A question, Mr. Mayor, if I may. The reference to the DBIA for work that's going to be done presumably on December 11th and February 2024. May I ask what precisely is meant by that? What is the work that will be done?
Mr. Fothrop.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so we'll be bringing a report back to council on the DBIA's request for lighting. So that's the pedestrian pathway project, the Finn lighting, and also the Cornwall light at Pitt and First.
Thank you.
Counselor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question to ask, if it would be possible, in the same way that, Councilor McDonald didn't know where that item came from, if it would be possible to add a column that indicates who brought the item forward, if it was a councillor or if it was a staff member, just so that we kind of know where things came from.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take that as a direction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further commentary on the unfinished business listing? Okay, all in favor of receiving it? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Communication reports. Municipal Works Yard, Quarter 3 report. That council receive this report from Infrastructure Municipal Works.
Motion, Counselor Hollingsworth. Seconder, Counselor Bennett. Any discussion on this item? Counselor McIntosh.
Comment, a little hard to read the graphs here, maybe large the fonts.
I see that.
No, you can't.
No, yeah, you're right.
I guess one of the advantages of using the computer, you can enlarge the screen, but
Your feedback is well received.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, the eScribe program knows to shrink the page to fit a piece of paper.
yeah,
That would normally be printed on 11 by 17.
yeah, I know the
We missed
challenges.
it.
I used to, in my other career, I used to, what they call pagination layout newspaper pages.
We're just trying to convince you to go digital there, man.
It's working.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your feedback. We'll attempt to catch those in the future to prevent that from happening again. And perhaps we can circulate an updated, properly sized copy to council so they can ensure they have the information they need. My apologies for that happening. Are there further comments or questions on this item? Councilor Ngunjo.
Mr. Mayor, speaking about third quarter financial result.
That is the next item.
Oh, that is the, okay.
I'll recognize you for that item. Any further commentary? Excuse me. All in favor of receiving the report? It's carried. Thank you.
So now, third quarter financial results for 2023, with a recommendation that council receive the third quarter financial results for the period ending September 30th, 2023, that council approve funding changes for the Morris Glen expansion and the redevelopment of 1520 Cumberland as outlined in this report.
Motion, Councilor Sabare, Councilor Ngunjo, yeah, and Councilor Ngunjo.
Mr. Mayor, I've noticed that our legal costs are over budgeted by $1 million. That is very big discrepancy. I would like to ask, what are the procedures required for the requesting of legal opinions? At what staff level can such request be authorized? Is there a centralized approval process? So I have few questions. If there isn't, I think there should be one. So I don't know if who's gonna.
Mr. Seo.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. There are a number of areas that the organization is vulnerable and seeks legal guidance. through various engagements with senior team and members of council, I think it's recognized that through this year's budget proposal, we will recommend to look at bringing legal resources within the organization, which not only will be a cost saving, but will also build up a lot of our tactical engagement efforts on both the labor relation and litigation fronts. As our acting GM of Human Resources is continuing to conduct an audit, we're recognizing that there is a big area of vulnerability, and we're seeking clarity going forward. And obviously the organization has encountered a number of litigious environments, which has increased that cost. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Bailey if there are additional points to make on those charges.
Ms. Bailey?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything to add, only that, as our CEO has indicated, we will be providing some further information in the 2024 budget to council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions. If you look at the paper agenda on page 148, and for you electronic people out there, it's the City Council tab of the budget report. It specifically says council's not given direction on remuneration adjustments for 2023 and moving forward. So I guess this probably is going to go to the clerk. Are you looking for us to make a motion about what we're doing with our remuneration packages, or are you going to kind of come and present something, or how does this, I can't even remember how we've done it in the past.
So we do have a requirement to review the remuneration package once every term, and that is coming up the next in 2024.
Okay, so there's going to be a report, I guess, about it? Or?
Yes, so in consultation with the mayor, we will decide on what time of year we'll bring that back, and it's up to you to make the decision.
Well, on a philosophical note, why not? Nobody likes talking about remuneration because people raise their fist and shake their hands and all that kind of stuff. But moving forward, Your Worship, previous councils prior to the last term kind of shirked that sort of thing, and then the consensus was, well, after 10 years, 15 years, whatever it was, the respective councillors were grossly underpaid, and so we made an attempt to sort of try to get it close, and then people said, now you're getting overpaid. So certainly I look forward to something soon, whatever council decides they want to do. Let's just kind of put that to bed one way or the other. On a personal note, sooner than later would be my preference. The second question I have, Ms. Bailey, on the report with regards to reserves, 199 if you're a paper person, summary reserves. So I notice the operating reserve, you wanted a balance of just under 8 million. We're at 6.7. Capital reserves balance was 6. We're at 10. If I read that right, is that making sense, or am I getting that right on? So the final tally on the operating side, currently the opening balance was 6.7. We're currently at 6.5. The target was 7.9, right? So that's, in a perfect world, that's where we would like that reserve to be, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the target balances are based on the city's reserve and reserve fund policy.
Right.
And just to note that that policy does need to be updated. When that policy was completed in 2017, it did not consider the waste management reserve nor the land reserve as part of capital. So there's different initiatives now today than there was when the long-term financial, the reserve and reserve fund policy was created back in 2017. So just to note that those two reserves, we are including them in the balance because they're capital reserves, but they were not part of that policy at that time.
Right. Well, the question I was getting to is that if you look at the capital reserve budget, our current balance based on your report is about $10.2 million. And so arguably, if I'm reading this correctly, that reserve is about $4.2 million over where our policy says we want it to be, which begs the question, at least to me, why wouldn't we take that money and move it into the other reserves that are currently below where they're supposed to be?
It's the two reserves for, through you, Mr. Mayor, for waste management and the land reserve that are for specific initiatives. One related to the organics next steps, and our land reserve is specifically for that project that will be happening in our business park. So if you take that out of the balance, it's
Okay.
very close to what our target balance is.
So those $2 million items, the two of them will eventually, they're gonna be fried pretty quickly when we start moving forward with these initiatives you've discussed, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So the other question, which I realize you've said the policy is kind of dated, but there is really no provision in the policy for us to move, if by some happenstance, so let's pretend we had a really good year, we got a ton of interest this year, we have a surplus of money. There's nothing in our policy currently that allows us to move money from one reserve that's higher than we want. I realize this one, the money's accounted for, it's coming, but there's nothing moving forward, or there's nothing in the policy that allows us to move money over so that reserves get closer to where we want them to be. There's nothing in our policy currently, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the end of each year of council, administration brings a report recommending certain contributions to reserves. It's our fourth quarter financial report, and it presents that to council. It's at council's discretion where those reserves sit. So not only at that time, but at any time, if council wants to move money from one reserve to another, it can, but not our restricted reserves. So
Okay.
if there's a balance in the building permit surplus reserve as an example, there are legislations that tell us that those funds need to stay there.
And last, I'll leave it. Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I just want to comment, Councillor Hollingsworth, that we will be tackling our remuneration shortly. And as the clerk mentioned, we are required to do it every term. And so that is a discussion coming. I would have preferred to try to get it done in the first year, but frankly, there was a lot going on. So unfortunately, it gets bumped a little bit because we have 4 years to tackle it. But it will be sooner rather than later. Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, when Councillor Hollins was on that, I think Tracy wanted to ask, offer some opinion thing. And I think she's going to tell us that it was put in the budget.
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
Through
I
Mr.
did want to make a comment that as a best practice, what we've tried to do in the past is have this council set the remuneration for the next council and not set your own remuneration. So perhaps council can think of about that as well. And the other item is that, yes, the city budgets for a general wage increase for council each year.
Yeah. So it's in this year's budget?
It's in this year's budget, and will be included in the 2024 budget as well.
And can you share with us?
Perhaps we can share it at the time
Okay,
that we bring that
that's fair enough.
information to council.
Yeah, okay.
Any for Councillor McDonald, then Councillor Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the first question, I'll do this in the order in which they occur, has to do with transit. And once again, we see in front of us evidence that our transit is not just surviving and bouncing back after COVID, but it's thriving to the tune of $150,000 surplus, which is great news. Now, I've got some very vague knowledge of transit systems in other cities, some of which are disastrous. And I'm just wondering if we've done any official comparison between us and especially comparably sized cities and how everybody has fared. I did a little Google research, but I found most of the information had to do with statements or resolutions that were made in 21, nothing as late as 22. So I think we've potentially got a good news story here that we should maybe publish in Municipal World or places like that where they could be part of some big discussion, because transit is so important, and it's not doing so well everywhere as it is here. So I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that.
Mr. Fother?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your comments. Yeah, yes, we'll absolutely look at something like that. We are approaching or getting close. Our ridership has been increasing throughout the year, and we're approaching our millionth rider, which is a big target for the city. So we will be looking to do an event if we reach that target.
Great. So I'll move on then to the property up on Cumberland North. And I hate to be a nuisance, but I just want to clarify the meaning of the word supportive housing. Does this mean that there'll be personnel available to come in to see people who are housed there? Or does it simply mean the physical building will be supportive or accommodating?
Ms. Morgan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent is to try and bring in supports into that facility
Okay.
to help those individuals who may require such services.
Great. And that would depend, of course, on partnerships with community agencies, and hopefully not necessarily that we have to pay for. People could be served, I suppose, wherever they are, but may as well be in our address if that's where they reside. And the drop-in or respite space, I'm just wondering if you've got any clearer ideas about that now that, I mean, you did mention this when you gave a big report on this project, and I'm sure a lot of people want to know exactly how far along or what specifics you can add, if any, yet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't elaborate on anything further than the last report. Certainly, our next steps are to meet with our architect and our internal working group to determine what that looks like. As we're prepared to release that information, we more than likely will look to a community consultation to release that information.
Great, because there's signs of activity. There is a concrete barrier now blocking the parking lot of the property, so obviously it's getting some attention. And what do you mean by the city's housing crisis team? Is that not you and Mrs. Smith? And are you going to move your main office to that site? Or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be our 2 social workers and the 1 case manager who we have put into this group to oversee many of those immediate housing crises. So those individuals will be relocated to that facility.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And on page 148, with reference to the council budget, perhaps this is going to come up in budget, and if that's the case, I'll hold off. But where are we in terms of moving ahead on our Indigenous training? We had the first session, how long ago? 2, 3 years? I've forgotten exactly when, but let's get moving. And maybe we are. Will something be proposed at budget?
There's a number of initiatives. Obviously, many of you know I just started, and there a few weeks ago, council had its strategic retreat review. So Catherine from our team is preparing a report, which will be at the beginning of the year. A report identifying the priorities, and obviously within that there'd be an important Indigenous action plan or reconciliation action plan. I don't want to speculate on its form, but there is certainly, based on the engagement from council, the importance of that. And as many of you know and have requested of me, an update on the EDI position within the organization. As you know, acting GM of Human Resources, Matt Stevenson, is conducting an audit and review of the HR services and functions within the organizations, and is looking at a matrix of skill model, which is a bit of a new approach to how we offer, how we respond as a city, particularly within the management structure. So I don't know if, Matt, if you had anything else to add other than the review's underway, and stay tuned.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, just that. I mean, there's a number of of reconsiderations that we're looking at right now, and if council would just allow us a little bit of time to get ahead of that and come back with a fulsome report to deal with many of these topics that we're talking about tonight. And we're committed to bringing that back to you.
Thank you. And I would like to suggest that whatever comes back to us, part of it be a tour of the whole territory. So obviously, we need passports to do the whole thing, not just Cornwall Island. But I think that's so essential because we hear references to the various villages and locations on the territory. And it's difficult to find a map that's reflective of reality there. So I hope that's going to be part of the plan. And if not, please work on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay,
Sorry.
my last question has to do with the recreation services on page 168. And if this is a Lauren Tayo project and he's not here to answer, I don't mind waiting. But there's a reference to the Visual Arts Pilot Project. And I'm curious to know what that is or was.
Mr. Fawthrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that is relating to the Kleinhaus Gallery, but I can reconfirm. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
And I just want to say thank you for your comments, Councillor. My office, CIO's office, can work with Akwesasne to arrange for a tour of the territory and
Good.
visit.
Be great to take one of the buses and have one of them drive it, or at least describe what we're seeing, where we're going through. Thank you.
Councillor Good.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad that my colleague brought up the matter of legal counsel. Obviously, we've incurred some pretty significant expenses for that, and I'm reassured to hear that we're considering bringing some legal counsel in-house. Another one of the items, not that it's a massive expense, but it seems like something that we're continually falling short on, is the parking recovery of funds through parking. I'm just wondering if there is a plan for how we're going to address that so that we're covering our expenses, and it looks like we're going to run through our reserve this year, so I'm just curious what the plan is.
I'll turn over to Mr. Feltrup in one second, and I do agree that parking policy is to encourage turnover. It's also usually some form of revenue generator, but unlike what most residents think, we are bounded by the Municipal Act, and those revenue generations cannot be attributable to all services. They have to stay within the pocket of parking in some way, shape, or form, and we need to justify those expenses. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Faltrup to add more on those shortfalls in revenues for parking services.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not in a position to be able to communicate a plan today that'll say when it will become fully cost recoverable, but that is the goal, and it has been taking a hit since COVID. And I mean, the goal is to see it move towards full cost recovery. However, there is a certain, I guess, community appetite for affordable parking as well, and so there's a bit of a limitation. It's a bit of a struggle to generate additional revenue while trying to make it affordable and not be too punitive with fines. Perhaps the next steps might be a need to reconvene a parking working group to look at evaluating that financial model to see as to how best to, if it's not recovering as quickly as we'd like, as to perhaps considering increasing our parking fees or violation penalties.
Wonderful. And I think kind of in keeping with what Councillor McDonald was saying in regards to the public transit that we have, and obviously seeing the increased ridership, we're transitioning, to a greener economy. And frankly, using public transit is a great way to help support the sustainability of our municipality. So if we need to increase our fees in order to have that cost recovery, I mean, I think that's something definitely worth considering. I will note here that I have heard some complaints in regards to our system and the functionality of some of the machines, and so I do hope that people are not receiving those fines when they should not be. So I will leave that there, and I'll wait to, hopefully we'll figure out the magic solution to recover those costs. I did have a question in regards to, I think it was page 196, we have a budget on there of 13 million for the social housing development on Pitt Street. I believe that was budgeted from 2022, and then I see that our build on 9th Street was roughly 19 million, so a $6 million difference. Is there an estimate on how far off we are with that original budgeted amount for Pitt Street? I understand it to be a much larger development. Obviously, inflation is real. Do we have an idea of how much more we're going to have to set aside for that? I'm not sure who to direct that to.
Turn it over to Ms. Bailey and Ms. Morgan to add. I have parts of the context, which is that we are in negotiations with CMHC to finalize the financial contribution. It is a complex agreement. At the time our team began negotiations, the interest rates were around 2%, 2.5%. And as you know now, they're above 5%. And part of the complexities with CMHC has been their ability for us to sign that loan and the delay. So we've incurred delays, which has increased the interest rates through that period, and they're not recognizing the period. So I'm in negotiations with them relating to that with so far limited success. But we've encountered, because of those obligations, additional legal costs, which we're looking to recoup from CMHC. Those are smaller amounts, and I'll turn it over to both Ms. Morgan and Ms. Bailey if there is additional context.
If I may, I'm assuming you meant 9th Street? You kept saying
That
Pitt
9th
Street.
Street,
You kept saying Pitt Street.
well, Pitt Street is on page 196, we have budgeted 13 million for that, for Pitt Street North.
Okay.
And then, but we spent 19 million on 9th Street.
Okay, so you want two separate, so on.
No, I'm curious. The development on Pitt Street is, from my understanding, much larger, but we've budgeted $6 million less than what we spent on Pitt Street. So I'm just wondering.
We haven't constructed anything on Pitt Street yet.
Yeah, I know. I'm wondering if we have an estimate on how much more.
I'll defer to Ms. I'm not quite sure what you're.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and Ms. Morgan definitely can provide more information. Pitt Street is phased, and I believe the 13 million represents one phase of it.
I see.
And then we'll step to phase 2 and phase 3. But Ms. Morgan, it's not the end of that budget, I do not believe.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification.
Okay, so then if I may say, I apologize. So Pitt Street, yes, is a phased-in approach. And based on the shift in where we are going with Pitt Street, we have yet to determine what that development will look like in its first phase. In terms of 9th Street, to the CAO's point, we have been fairly on budget with that project. The difference in spending has been largely because of other funding that has come in. So the cost to borrow remains around 13 million, but that is slightly higher simply because of higher interest rates and additional legal costs we've had to incur because of the length of time it's taken us to get an approval from CMHC.
Wonderful. And I have heard musings that the interest rate might drop, so let's just all knock on wood or cross our fingers that that's going to happen. Can I ask, while we're on the note of 9th Street, is that building now fully occupied?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it is.
Wonderful. Okay, that is it. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments on this item? Okay, seeing none. Oh, Councillor Goodrow.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Speaking about the building that is fully occupied, I just wanted to know how is the process to get local there, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in order to apply for residence at that location, you have to apply through our centralized wait list. You can apply online or in person at our offices next door or or at our housing services office as well. And whether that's for private market or rent geared to income.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of receiving? Carried, thank you.
New business motions. Our first one is additional tax on vacant buildings. Now therefore be it resolved that this matter be referred to administration to prepare a report on the feasibility of implementing an additional tax on vacant buildings within the city limits. And now therefore be it further resolved that a clear and equitable tax structure for vacant buildings, taking into consideration factors such as the duration of the vacancy, form part of this report. And now therefore be it further resolved that this report include details of how to engage the public, how to include outreach and education to inform property owners and the community about the benefits and implications of the proposed additional tax, and that the report include an implementation process for appeals and exemptions where appropriate. It was proposed by Councillor Sarah Good and seconded by Councillor Caroline Hébert.
Councillor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. We've presented this motion. It was something that came up following our strategic planning day when we had some discussions about housing and a number of different topics, of course. We recognize that we're in a housing crisis and that you can drive through our city and see vacant buildings almost anywhere you go. I recognize that a number of years ago, there was actually a reduced tax rate on vacant buildings, and I believe it was in the previous term that was debated and brought back to the same rate as a standard payer. Now, the intent of this motion is to, am I being heard all right? Yeah?
Yes, but it does sound like it's cutting out a bit.
The intent of this motion in applying this additional tax is to reduce the vacancies within our community and to apply pressure on creating occupancy within some of the identified vacant buildings within our community.
Thank you. Councillor Hébert.
Just to throw my support for this motion, I think where our community is doing quite a bit in terms of addressing the housing crisis, and that's thanks to Ms. Morgan and her department, but there's so many other mechanisms that we can do as council to hopefully put some pressure, or we can say encourage landlords and property owners to either sell their properties for them to be filled with folks who are looking for housing, or to put their units back on the market. I would also like to see possibly for consideration this to be residential and commercial, because we do have a commercial issue as well. So looking forward to a report and debating this at a future meeting.
Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, I'm glad the motion includes benefits and implications, because there are immense implications in this. I don't know about vacant residential units. There are a lot of vacant commercial units, and somebody said the question is, why are they vacant? You might want to talk to the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority when it comes to vacant residential areas. There's 2 dandy homes up in my end of town that's been vacant for 15 years. And they just sit there. And so anyway, I probably at the end of the day wouldn't support this, but I certainly want to hear what administration has to say about it. You know, there's a certain enforcement aspect, and actually it's married with your next motion too. They are married. And anyway, looking forward to hear from administration.
Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as this is a notice of motion, this is a notice of motion, or this some
New business.
a new business? Yeah. So, I mean, we see no issues in receiving this. It is more important. It is more comprehensive than simply receiving the direction, because under the Municipal Act, to present a vacant unit tax, you have to do all the background study on the economics of this. So we're glad to entertain what is the range of policies that could be enacted from. I sort of capture 2 things. One is a revenue generation. The other one is in good keeping of a vacant building, so more of a bylaw aspect. So we'll take a look at it. We'll provide response. But if we further get a direction from council to pursue this, we'll need a full financial and economic background as per the Municipal Act requirements.
Councillor Hébert.
So maybe what could be included, if it's information that we have, is the number of vacant properties in our community to see if there's an actual benefit to move forward with this, right? Like if there's a way to find a number, I don't know if that's possible. I know we know the number of units. We may not know how many are vacant, but if that's something that can be presented with this, that would be ideal. And then if we see if it's minimal, then maybe it wouldn't be worth moving forward, but all the information we have would be appreciated.
Further questions or comments? Councilor Ngunjo?
Mr. Mayor, I agree that we should try to find any kind of solution to solve this matter of housing in our community. That is very good. But at the same time, I'm a bit concerned about this motion, however. My question is, you're going to tell me if it is the intention to the movers to include vacant commercial properties in this as well. I believe that cities have such a tax on vacant residential property, namely Toronto and Montreal. The second question is, do we have any other community in Ontario that have such tax? Thank you.
I imagine that would come back with the
Through
report.
the chair, please.
My apologies. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I imagine that information would come back through the report from administration. I can't provide a succinct answer to that, and I think the CAO captured it well, that it's the intention is, one, to have some revenue generation, but also to enhance and or reduce, enhance property standards within the municipality. So it would include commercial as part of this report. That is the intent.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, we would, if the motion is approved, we would seek some clarity from other municipalities in terms of policies they've enacted or tools they've enacted. So we would do a scan as part of this motion to provide some context of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what's in place in jurisdictions. So you'd have an idea of where they're located. My feeling is that I assume they're located mainly in larger municipalities, but if the issue is localized and has the same needs, then council can, and we'll certainly provide that in the analysis.
Mr. Mayor, Troyo, yes, I think having this kind of comparison between communities in Ontario will help the council to take the right decision. So that will be very appreciated if we can have this answer through your report. Thank you very much.
Councilor McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the points been captured. I think we should emphasize the commercial buildings because, especially if we're trying to enumerate those buildings that are vacant, it's pretty hard to come up with an accurate count of the few and far between residential buildings that are uninhabited. Okay, thank you.
Any further commentary? Councilor Good, do you want to wrap up? Okay. All in favor? All opposed? It's carried. Thank you.
Our second new business motion is Property Tax Rebate Program for Affordable Residential Rental Properties, proposed by Councillor Sarah Good and seconded by Councillor Caroline Hébert. Now therefore be it resolved that this matter be referred to administration to prepare a report on the feasibility of establishing a property tax rebate program for residential rental properties that provide proof of renting a minimum number of units below the market value or market rate. Now therefore be it further resolved that the report include details of how a one-time inspection of eligible properties can be verified for compliance with safety and habitability standards. Sorry, sometime my French tongue. Now therefore, be it further resolved that the report include proposed clear guidelines for the application process, including the documentation required for proof of affordability and safety compliance.
Councillor Good?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Now, in keeping with the previous motion, the intention of this motion is to maintain the current stock of affordable housing within the community. I'm sure many of us here who have rented in the past have seen that there has been an incredible increase in rental rates over the course of the last 5 years, even more. My last rental, I want to say, was in 2015, and I paid $650 for a 2-bedroom apartment, and it was pretty decent. That doesn't exist anymore, and for the few that have maintained those properties, especially those that are deeply affordable, I believe that it is worth incentivizing landlords to maintain those properties and to hold on to them so that we are not continuing to lose that housing stock through rent evictions, which we have seen so many of. Now, this also plays into a previous motion that had been brought forward at a previous council, which came to an inventory of rental or an application process whereby landlords would have to submit their properties. I see this in a sense as being a voluntary application for landlords who are providing rentals at below market value. And I believe that this could be a way to slow the bleed, if I can put it that way, of the affordable rentals within our community. It's an idea, and I think with the crisis that we're in, it's certainly worth exploring, and I hope my colleagues agree.
Councillor Hebert?
Ditto.
Councillor Sabri?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I understand what is being proposed here, at least I hope I understand what's being proposed here, but respectfully, I have to ask, the person that is moving this is, by her own admission, a landlord, and I fear that this could be rather dangerous with regards to a conflict of interest. Even asking for such a report can put us down a very dangerous path with regards to the conflict of interest. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm looking for a ruling on this.
May I respond?
I'll allow it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I recognize that, and I actually intended to put that out with full transparency. As you know, I've mentioned it openly in council several times. I will say, I am a landlord, not of an affordable rental, and call me not... This is not something that I would stand to actually get a pecuniary interest from, because it simply would not apply to the property, the single property with which I am a landlord.
I'm going to stop debate there because a conflict of interest is not something that I can rule on as chair. Conflict of interest has to be determined by the member themselves, and if there's any disagreement on that, it can be appealed to the Integrity Commissioner. And we're not going to be debating a conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest. Members have the responsibility to declare their own conflicts of interest, and if another member doesn't agree, there's a process for that. So, and I'm not going to allow further debate between members on this. Councillor Hollingsworth?
Question to Ms. Bailey. Do we, and I think I know the answer, but I just better double check. Do we have different ratios between plain residential and rental units?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the multi-res.
Yes.
7 units or more on the property. New builds, so a new building going up, multi-res, is at the same ratio as residential.
Okay. All right, that's all I need, Your Worship. Thank you.
Councillor McIntosh?
Yeah, again, I have some difficulty with that. What is market rate? I may own a 2-bedroom unit, and it's only worth $800 a month, but the guy across the street has a 2-bedroom unit, and it's a lot nicer. You know, what is that? It's, you know, the old system, it's the supply and demand, free market thing. Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Good talked about how things have risen in cost of rents, but so has cost of owning property. If you're a landlord and you're paying for the fuel and you're on natural gas, I know my bill's gone up on average about $60, $75 a month. You're paying that. So there's a lot of, there's good landlords and bad landlords, and I understand, Council Good, you're a very good landlord. And anyway, I just, and it could be another, how do we enforce it? That's the other thing too. I appreciate the intent of this, but again, I look forward to administration struggling to give us some answers on this one, but bureaucracy reigns in this one.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Gunjo.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Once again, I am convinced that trying to find solution to solve this matter is something very good that we should go through. But at the same time, I think that we also need to make sure that we promote housing which complies with property standards. A one-time inspection, that is the point, will not accomplish this, and we need to explore that further. I think more than one-time inspection should be included into this procedure. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. CAO.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'd like to turn it over at the end of my remarks to Ms. Bailey just to add additional context. We clearly understand the spirit of the motion and certainly recognize the importance of the rental stock more broadly and through that due to length of stay the affordability that might have gone through that. I want to assure members of council that we have a robust rent supplement program that Ms. Morgan and Ms. Bailey manage within our portfolio, within the private rental market portfolio, which bring a lot of affordability and stability through those initiatives. There are kind of two elements that are a bit in conflict, and I'm not sure how we would resolve it. One is if we get directions to conduct a review of a CIP, a community improvement plan, for affordable units or for the increase of new rental housing, then that is a review in itself, and that would be through a strategic plan effort, really, because it's substantive and has some financial implications for the organization. On the other hand, a tax rebate program, as I think some of the councillors were heading that way in the ratios. Ultimately, we pull around $90 million from local property taxes. So if we reduce a group, we need to raise another group. So that is complex property tax and law and implications that have substantive policies relating to that. So we can certainly conduct I'm giving you a very quick summary of what are three areas that we would analyze for council to then consider if there is an X path or if there is a preferred path. But there's some limits to the three areas relating to rent subs, relating to a CIP review, and relating to the tax ratios depending on the tax class. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Bailey if there are other considerations or elements.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything further to add.
Can I complete, Mr. Mayor? Yes, just wanted to add that I'm going to support this motion. Sure.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that the most difficult consideration here would be looking at an apartment and determining what the market value of it is, and then taking 20% of that off, we could have an army out there examining every apartment for us to determine what the market value of it is, because really it's what the market will bear, is what the apartment will rent for. And then some objective person's going to go in and say, this is $1,600 and this is $1,500, and justify that in some way in order for us, because a tax break of any kind is subject to intense scrutiny. And I think right at the ground floor, it would be impossible for us to determine the market rate of an apartment. I stand to be corrected on that, but I think it's pretty subjective. So just, that would be a huge consideration. Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my issue with this particular motion is that I don't think any tax rebate is going to make up for the difference in lost revenue of keeping their rates lower than. So I don't see how any tax incentive is going to make up for the cost that the landlord would incur by keeping his rates 20% lower than whatever we decide market value is. I think there's other ways that we can go about this kind of thing, and I think our CAO mentioned there's rent subsidies, there's lots of programs to help people get into a place. But I just can't wrap my head around if we reduce this their rates, as was said, somebody else's has to go up, and so to me you're punishing people that don't own a property to subsidize somebody that does. And I would have a hard time in my head telling somebody, my next door neighbor, saying, yeah, your rates are going to go up a little bit higher than they should have because somebody else is going to get a reduction. So I can't support the motion.
Okay. Any further comments before the mover wraps up? Yeah. Councillor Good?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to be clear that I'm open to all suggestions for how we can enhance and maintain our current affordable housing stock. And I would like, may I ask a question to Ms. Morgan while I'm making my closing remarks? As far as determining a baseline for affordable housing, my understanding was that it was based on a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or a 3-bedroom, to that effect. Am I misunderstanding that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have an affordability chart that we use. It's in conjunction with, determined with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Yeah.
It is subject to rent control guidelines every year, but it is not based on number of bathrooms, strictly number of bedrooms.
Okay. So we do have in place a structure, a mechanism by which we can gauge what 20% below that market rate is. That structure exists, it's in place. Now, to Councillor McIntosh's point, if you're renting a luxury apartment, you're probably not going to qualify for this rebate. It is a voluntary application that if a landlord has rental units that are being rented below market, that it incentivizes them to maintain those rental units and not to go through with, we have seen so many rent evictions happening. And I'd be willing to bet that any landlord, maybe I'm probably wrong here, but I'll eat my words, but any landlord that purchased their building during COVID or afterwards probably is not able to rent those units at affordable rates because they simply weren't able to purchase them at affordable rates. That's just the matter of fact. Now, if you purchased your building in 2010 and you're able to rent your units for $800 a month, and you're going according to the guidelines for increases, maybe you can add an extra 20 or 30 bucks on a year. It's not a lot. So what are we doing to encourage landlords to maintain those units? Now, I'm open to all suggestions, as I said before, and if this one's not the one, then that's fine with me. But I really do think that we need to be creative in this. We can't just be assuming that social housing is going to pick up the slack when another building gets sold and all the tenants get kicked out, and then they end up on the social housing list. So how do we prevent that? That's what I'm looking at here. That is the intention of this motion, and I look forward to seeing what comes back. I recognize that it's complex and that it's not going to be necessarily fairly straightforward. So I just want to be transparent with that I appreciate the complexity of it. And I hope that we can find many innovative solutions, because I do not believe that there is one solution that is going to fix this. And I intend to continue to push forward that agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? All opposed? Oh. Councillor McDonald, did I see your hand go up twice?
Yeah, I really want to ask a question, and it touches on the procedural
Mic-
bylaw explanation we had and this.
Microphone, please.
Thank you. I want to ask a question. I should have asked this when we had Mr. O'Connor presenting procedural bylaw, but I sort of hoped this wouldn't happen. But it does. We have a new business motion, and the motion is to refer something to administration, and we spent 20 minutes debating the content. I think this has been, well, it's not a waste of time. It's been interesting, but it's not to the point. The motion is to refer to administration. That's like a 2-minute business piece. And instead, we're discussing what we would discuss during a debate after administration gives their report. So in terms of procedural bylaw, I hope we can flag that and somehow just not let it happen, because we're going to hear all these same arguments again after administration reports. So I really think we're way off topic, and this happens often. Somebody did ask if this was a new business motion. I think you did, Mr. CAO, or if it was a notice of motion. And I think a notice of motion absolutely wouldn't have gone to debate, but sometimes it does too. And I really think it shouldn't, so I just bring that up.
I can clarify.
Mr. CAO?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. The reality is, as council reviews its agenda, motions can be brought and updated to for vote. I think what is recommended through, and clerk, please correct me if I'm wrong, but in discussions with Mr. O'Connor, it is recommended to submit an inquiry, which is the question. It's not voted on. It's every member has that privilege, and then administration would respond. No different than what you're seeing, say, on unfinished business, but it would be a list of inquiries awaiting response, basically. And that would not be on every agenda, but that would be provided quarterly. And as reports are available, then, and that those would be added as communication items to the agenda.
And if I can say in response, does that mean then that, consider this having been an inquiry that I made, at some point in a future meeting, somebody is going to rule on whether or not we do actually discuss the content of a new business motion like this, or if we simply hold ourselves to the motion itself, which is to refer to administration? Like, that's...
I can only, through Mr. Mayor, I can only speak through practice, through my experience of practice, which has been to bring an agenda item to council. It takes 2/3 to vote to add the item to the agenda, which usually is, if council chooses to add it to the agenda, then it forms then debate on the item.
And what is it where, I don't even think there's a motion that I just made I have a question. So I'm confused now as to why we're talking about a 2/3 vote.
I'm sorry if I misinterpreted. Maybe I can clarify what I was saying, and maybe you can clarify then. What I'm saying is that if there are motions that are added by members, once the agenda is released, then for the agenda to be added, usually you require a vote of council agreeing that that be an item added to your agenda for debate.
And has there been anything like that done tonight? No, I don't think. Because I'm not making a motion, I'm simply asking the question.
Yeah,
Like,
new business from the floor like that is something that's in between an inquiry and in between. I mean, I'm not a clerk, but that is a question we should ask.
yeah, because I've got no problem with the motion. All I have a problem with is that we're entering into a debate that is not about the motion. It's in anticipation of what's going to come back, and we're, anyway. No big deal. I just raise it. And when we're talking procedural bylaws in the first quarter of 2024. I think that's when we're going to go over those points that Mr. O'Connor brought up tonight. Then I'll raise it again in that context and see if everybody's comfortable with us debating before the report comes back from administration or whatever. Okay?
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
If I might, Your Worship, with your indulgence, I think what needs to be noted here is the procedural bylaw that was presented tonight has not been approved by council. That's not our procedural bylaw. The current procedural bylaw allows us to make motions under new business that are mover, seconder, debate. Thus, this evening's new business item under our current procedural bylaw allows for debate, hence debate. If we approve what was presented this evening, that old new business kind of thing won't exist anymore. Am I correct on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I need to consult with our consultant.
Fair enough. But I think the point I'm trying to make, Your Worship, is that we are operating under our current procedural bylaw, which allows new business, which is debatable and so forth and so on. That being said, Your Worship, do I know if the motion was carried or not?
So the reason I wasn't able to is because I saw a hand go up twice when I called both votes, so I need to retake the vote for clarity. Okay, I'm treating those as points of information. All in favor? Okay. All opposed? Motion is defeated. Madam Clerk?
Bylaw 2023-109 is being presented to council for adoption.
Motion. Councillor Bennett, seconder. Councillor Hollingsworth, all in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
We are now at reports from standing, advisory, special, and ad hoc committees of council, Mr. Mayor.
Council? Okay, seeing none.
And we have one notice of motion, Human Resources Review. Now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the City of Cornwall request a comprehensive report from the Human Resources Department on the following matters. Now be it further resolved that these items be presented in separate reports, with Part 1 presented ahead of the 2024 budget and Part 2 presented within 6 months following. Part 1, staffing levels, a breakdown of staffing levels by department. 2, demographics, a breakdown of employee demographics to ensure that the city is promoting diversity and inclusivity in its hiring practices. 3, overtime liability, a summary of overtime hours worked and associated costs. 4, performance reviews, an overview of employee performance reviews, including the number of reviews conducted. Sick days, leaves, a breakdown of employees' sick days and leaves, as well as any patterns or trends. Next is retention turnover, a summary of employee retention and turnover rates. And 7, salary scales, full breakdown of salary scales in the reporting period with anticipated annual increases. And Part 2 includes wellness strategies, an overview of the initiatives taken to personal matter. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm missing some pages. Please.
Okay. I'll continue. So 8, wellness strategies, an overview of the initiatives taken to promote employee wellness. 9, EFAP utilization, an overview of the use of the Employee and Family Assistance Program. 10, grievances/arbitration, a summary of employee grievances and arbitration cases, including any trends or issues identified. 11, health and safety incidents/accidents, an overview of workplace health and safety incidents and accidents, including the number and types of incidents, to inform strategies for improving workplace safety. 12, recruitment, an overview of recruitment activities and any challenges identified. 13, WSIB claims stats / categories, a summary of workplace safety and insurance board, WSIB claim statistics. 14, training, a summary of the training that has been delivered to employees across various departments, including number of employees having received training. 15, accommodations, an overview of accommodation requests, including number and type of accommodations provided. Now be it further resolved that the Department of Human Resources be directed to provide this report thereafter on an annual basis.
Next, Mr. Mayor, is the confirming bylaw.
Motion on the confirming bylaw. Councillor Sabri, seconder. Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Adjournment. Councillor Bennett, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried, thank you, we are adjourned. Thank you, merci. Niamakoa.